conference. I think we're off to a wonderful start with the two plenaries that we've just had the pleasure to listen to. And I'm very pleased to chair this particular panel with our three distinguished guests, all coming from abroad. And I'm especially interested in their talks. I believe what we're going to do is we're going to run through the talks, and then afterwards, after all the talks, we're going to have a Q&A and a discussion. I'm going to present the title of our panel, looking at our Earth, novel perspectives for humanity. And in this panel, we are welcoming Professor Alejandra de la Mercedes Fernandez, who is at the National Northeastern University in Argentina. The National Northeastern University is also a partner, an official partner of this conference. And to this effect, I'd like to thank Professor Justo Zapponi for being present, also from the Northeastern University in Argentina. I'm very delighted to welcome back Professor Dr. Heba El Delgadi from the American University of Cairo. Dr. Heba was here virtually last year, and it's great to welcome Dr. Heba El Delgadi back to our conference. And a newcomer to our conference is my good friend, Dr. Giacomo Petrarca, who is coming to us from Italy, from the Vita Salute San Raffaele University in Milano. I'm going to welcome Giacomo first time in Riyadh, and I think he's loving it already. So I'm looking forward to his talk, and I'm sure you all are. I'm going to give the floor over in progressive order. So we're going to start off with Professor Alejandra de la Mercedes Fernandez. Please, take the floor.
Thank you very much. I feel very honored visiting this country, this kingdom, and this conference. My text is titled, "Indeed, the Earth Does Not Move, Update on the Husserlian Implication for Our Time." In this text by Husserl from 1934, Phenomenology as Method and as Theorem could already be said to have already taken place. The starting point is to transcend the examination of the notion of space and time as articulator of philosophical modernity, challenging the ontology centered in the substance. But the real interest is in discussing the question of the certainty that the science provides about the phenomenal world. It is about how to combine the pure intentionality of consensusness with the absence of presumptions that world is. For this reason, it is proposed to clarify the origin of spatiality and all that it implies, corporeity, nature, and the correlate of transcendental knowledge. But in the current experiential state, these issues become relevant through the annulment of space as a material dimension by the notion of extensions of the world as infinity. Kant, in the first chapter of the Critique of Purism, exposed in this regard system of cosmological ideas that the conditions of the idea of space, quote, are already presupposed with the given condition, end quote, because if the condition is given, it is also gives the complete sum of the conditions, quote, which is never found in experience, but only in the idea. And that, quote, the question of its totality is not a requirement of reason. That is to say, that the idea of the world does not have what be apprehensible as the totality that is point so. Sarah Lehauser has this question on mind because its theme is to confront such a polarity that which clips from the unity of world. Husserl asks, what is the meaning of an existing world, of such an existence? For phenomenology, the world is other than conscientious, and, first of all, it does not found a cognitive relationship, but rather is a consciousness as a tension where the world is constituted as a world. It is as if the intuition had to complete with representation, a presumption of totality. World and earth cannot be confused. Our original world is the earth, base of the experiential genesis, reducible each time under synthesis of experiences. The earth thus officiate as soil for the bodies is also a body. What? In the original figure of the representation, the earth does not move, end quote, while the physical bodies move in relation to it. The thing in the world of which one has experience has the value of reality, since that experience is an experiential synthesis that acts as nucleus of all physical possibilities which take the form of being effective. The movement or rest of bodies is indifferent with respect to the earth, which is installed beforehand in perception prior to an implective intention. Now, the inclinable center of experiences is the body itself, the 0 point with respect to which we witness movement. Our bodies give the idea of spatiality because they move in different directions and by reference to the earth that does not move. But the sciences of the cosmos say that the earth and the stars orbit. They move following as a route. The earth, for that dimension, is an abstraction that is far from behind the earth on which of life unfolds. However, the earth is given in the experience of fragments that in turn can be integrated into the experience of the earth as grown. But the earth is not physical body, but is possibility. It does not consist of an order of parts any more than it is the part of anything. The earth is single space without soil for itself. Comparatively, bodies or flesh-like are resemble the earth in that they themselves are its center. Kinesthetic consciousness is conscientiousness of movement outside one's own body, referring to what happens empirically for oneself. To move, commute, is to always carry the center, so it cannot be considered movement. The soul of the earth is an original reality and everything is related to it. The experience of traveling in intraterrestrial spaces and experiences by reference to Earth and space is a single space without a floor. This spaceship is, according to Husserlian prediction, an arc of the Earth, a substitute for the terrestrial sphere. Note that the terrestrial sphere statement itself is a total representation away from the totality of experiences on Earth as grown, only accessible outside of its ground. Proximity and distance are factors of reference, but not of the Earth, but of the center that each one of us is. The GPS works under the model of point of the surface of a sphere, whose 0 point is the body of each one, the body itself. When the system is activated, geolocalization occurs from outside the Earth via satellites and in principle, the distance is resolved instantly. For example, while I am here in Riyadh, and my place of work is 12,693 kilometers. Hence, the WhatsApp messages that I receive right now from my students cancel the material distance and its temporal consequence by patching all of us on the same ground at the same time, the same reference, the Earth. I could say that my students are here and now in Saudi Arabia, interacting with me, and they could do so with you. What happens with the body when affirming that is the 0 point of all orientations? Husserl seems to infer that one's own body is an original evolved against naturalism. The body itself is a bearer of the earth, which all its meaning, just as there is a earth, there is only one humanity. The detachment of the earth, for example, in aerospace trip, does not annul its belonging, mentioning a real or symbolic common ground. Quote, there is only one humanity and one earth to which as many fragments as are detached or have been detached belong. Thus Husserl's radical question to Galileo's stubborn statement, e pur si muove, that is, however it moves, does the earth move for us, or on the contrary, does it rest? The earth does not rest either because it does not move. Let us remember that moving is the reference to something fixed, to a ground, which does not configure cosmic space. It is mundane experiences that allow us to affirm that there is a war, that we have a war, and that the war is both immediacy and representation, and that is supposed a ground on which to move and settle. The risk of losing the earth, a settlement, as will happen by a voluntary or involuntary nuclear catastrophe or a thermonuclear reaction, that is the example that Husserl gives, will turn the fragments into just that, but the earth will remain, developing horizon of all spatiality in case of survival. In another order, but following this discursive thread, Marshall McLuhan, more contemporaneously, having pointed out that the media are extensions of the bodiless to reinforce the Husserlian position that the earth does not move. The McLuhanian extensions are understood in relation to the type of world they determine and the consequent change that this has in the forms of life. However, the world does not move. It is the extensions that configure it in one way or another. Proximity and distance are also secondary to the effect of the media, which paradoxically place distant points in the same space in a virtual sphere. Although for McLuhan, there will be the necessary background on which the technologies put emphasis to isolate themselves from it. In the book Classroom Without Walls, he specified that the electronic media contract the world in such a way that you can participate in everything that is happening and at the same time that this happens. In the global village, such the denomination of McLuhan and Powell is the community of the earth that does not move, even more so that of the flat earth. Aren't there perhaps in the middle of the 20th century flat eaters? how it's in fact possible after Magallanes circumnavigate the terrestrial sphere and air navigation and space flight, prove almost literally the sphericity of the Earth and its movement around its planetary axis and by the orbit that corresponds to it in the solar system. It is possible, in part, because the centrality of the body intensified by media extensions generate both instantaneity and the illusion of totality. Everything that I noted with the Kantian mention at the beginning of my exposition. The experience that the Earth does not move is literal. Electronic technologies have produced total numbing effects, displacing the sensory intensities involved and the media operating logic itself for the body. Neither Husserl nor McLuhan deny that the air rotates and moves according to astrophysics. What they do say is that the movement of the Earth is not consistent with the phenomenal or phenomenological experience of the Earth. How it's possible that the world is given before as with full certainty, and that such certainty and fullness are put in theoretical terms that have no relation of dimension with experience of immediacy and vitality? The phenomenological response that I raise with you is that this certainty comes from the danger that one day it will not be there, that we may be left without ground, without orientation, alienated, for which we previously ran in the prejudgment of admitting its completeness without abandoning the idea of proximity and which is that or fragment. In the experiential experience that testifies that there is inamovable and the diverse ideas of the world are supported by the soil in which cultures occur in time. Spatiality corresponds to the earth, time to cultures, also clinging to a significant ground which is clothed with immediacy. This immediacy, Husserl says, is what assures that the earth does not lose its sense of abode as much as our bodies cannot lose their sense of oneness that form part of its proper being. Indeed, the earth does not move. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Alejandra de la Merced Fernandez. I'm going to give it over now to Professor Dr. El Degheidi for her talk, and her talk will also have a slide presentation, which you will be the master of.
Hopefully. Well, let's just make sure things will work well with all these gadgets that I have.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much, Joseph. Is that mic working well, or I'll follow the tips to take it next to my chin. Thank you so much. It's quite an honor, actually, to be here in Saudi Arabia for the second time and be invited, actually, to this conference. And through this talk today, I'll actually be taking you through a small journey on space rather than out of space of what we had in our kind of speaker today in the morning. So what I'll do is take you through what I've been doing at the university, at the American University in Cairo, with my students as well. So my destination is actually looking into the role of universities in general and what responsibilities higher education institutions have in relation to greening their campus. And of course, what I mean by greening the campus is not specifically in the color green, but in the practices that universities take as a whole. So as I reach to the destination, looking at the color green STEAM education, I'll have various stops. So one of the stops is actually specifically looking into the 21st century, what universities should be doing as a higher education institution, and even beyond that. An emphasis coming from the courses that I offer to my students in the MA degree and in my undergraduate students is looking at education sustainable development. And this is actually very much a topic related to many of the organizations, global talks even happening these days, and we're going to look at that a little bit more. And then shifting to kind of a buzzword again that's happening in education, and more into the interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity, where reform in countries are looking into bringing disciplines and fields together to make more meaningful learning to students and learners as a whole. And then I'll sandwich in my topic social responsibility as individuals, as humanities, and also our responsibility towards our planet and towards ourselves as well. So our planet Earth, of course, a lovely view of what the planet looks like. As I mentioned, I'm not going to take you to Mars, but my talk will focus on what we can do as we are still on planet Earth. So a lovely rotation of the planet, and we'll say more about what we can do to save it and save humanity. So one of the questions I have in mind, and I'd like to share this with you as we even build on the discussion, whether during the panel or even after that, is what kind of relationship that we have with the planet Earth, and whether the behaviors and actions that we actually do on Earth is something that positive or negative, and what we can maintain in our actions as a whole. And with that comes a conversation or a topic related to planetary education, citizenship education, and global citizenship education too. So one of the ideas when I'm looking into what we do in terms of humanity and our connection with Earth, and how we can establish the needs that we have historically, I just had to touch on the various industrial revolutions that we go through, and we've actually been through. So starting off from the first industrial revolution, and a focus, of course, on the mechanical production and power, and then moving on to the second industrial revolution, where there's an emphasis on mass production and electricity, and then the third industrial revolution, where we're looking into computers and kind of information technology, and then the current industrial revolution, which is the fourth industrial revolution, where we're looking into machine learning, 3D printing, and a lot of artificial intelligence taking place. So this is actually to kind of equip us to maintain what we need in terms of our survival as human beings and as citizens as well. But this whole advancement in technology and industrial revolution come with an important question to keep in mind of how the fourth industrial revolution is actually affecting our Earth. How is it affecting us in a way that it will either maintain human beings and civilization, or will it affect us in a different way? So let's just have a look at what we are thinking about. This is actually a small snippet about the impact of the fourth industrial revolution on planet Earth. So the Anthropocene is actually a terminology now that I'm seeing even more and more in terms of the literature, and it's actually just to try to identify what it is. It's a terminology that's coming up now as it represents the impact we have as human beings on Earth. And of course, unfortunately, there are so many negative impacts that we have. And we need to think about the consequences of our behavior, the consequences of our action, not only for our own survival as current generations, but also as we look into our next generations as well. So as you can see in the figure on your right hand, my left hand then, is actually looking at the impact of our actions on Earth. And of course, it's very much different than what we've seen in the first slide. So this kind of brings in an accumulation of our negative actions as a whole on Earth. And I think we need this why to actually have a pause and reflect whether we are going in the same direction, although we actually need to change our behaviors, our attitudes, so we don't end up with our planet Earth in the way that we actually are seeing it. So many questions to keep in mind, and this is why I'm trying to link it as much as possible with what's happening in higher education institutions and universities to make it more of a greener place and a more stable place for our generation, the current one, but also the future generations as well. So where should we go next? So knowing that there are negative impacts happening from the fourth industrial revolution, which seem to be kind of pleasing because it does meet our needs, but then on the other hand, they're seeing the negative impact of that. So where should we go? Should we drop on our needs or actually start to think of different ways that we can go about this? So this is why I'm raising the question related to universities and what universities should be doing or could be doing or need to do as well. I'm focusing on, and here just I have a couple of institutions, and of course I have some connections with one of the institutions here in the Riyadh with King Saud University. But I have to say that universities as a whole, they have some generic aspects where they focus on, and some specific ones where it aligns with the context, with the culture, and how they see their aim and their goal in general. So if you want to raise some kind of questioning about what is the role of higher education institutions and universities as a whole, we can think of a couple of them. And I'm focusing here maybe a little bit more in Egypt, but I'll take you to a more generic slide. So the roles of universities can actually, if you can think about that. So obviously it's a place where we can nurture some of the questions and some of the aspects of future generations in terms of curiosity, critical thinking, probably open the doors between what's happening in universities, in its programs that it's offering, with the societies and with the communities, seeing itself as an innovative place. As a place where we can bring in various stakeholders to hold conversations and dialogues for the better of our communities. And it is a place where parents and learners assume to have some specific roles as they graduate for future careers as well. So this is kind of in a nutshell what universities are currently doing. But what we need to make sure of, in addition to the traditional roles of universities, that we also anticipate a further role which looks into the future, which looks into what we can anticipate from the generations that are being graduating from these universities too. And this is why when we think about universities, we need to include in it its multifaceted role. It has a theoretical role, it has a philosophical role, and it has an ethical role. And at the end of the day, we need to think about higher education and education specifically in terms of an opportunity where we can actually enable societal transformation. If a university is only dictating students and learners and replicating the knowledge over and over again without making changes, without making innovative pathways to envision the future, that would be a very minimal role, specifically in these days. And as my colleague had mentioned, I mean, the idea of having social media and having all these search engines and kind of opening the university walls to the outside. We're no more just the experts as professors or even teachers in our fields, because knowledge can actually be acquired from different sources. So students are not just waiting for us to dictate and spoon feed them with the knowledge. We need to think about universities as a mind opener for students and for learners, where they need and they can actually learn more as lifelong learners rather than replicates of specific pieces of knowledge here and there. And this is why part of what I'll be taking and showing you today is what I'm offering to my students, my MA students and my undergraduate students through the courses that I offer in relation to education for sustainable development. And this is, again, an area where I see that we need further growth and further responsibility at the individual level, but also at the university level too. So in a nutshell, what do we mean by education sustainable development? Here I'm referring to the UNESCO's definition of what does it mean, and why do we actually need that universities and programs in general emphasize an education sustainable development. So in a nutshell, if I read it off the screen, it's developing the community to meet the needs of their own generations without compromising the ability of the future generations to fulfill their needs. If you look at the consumer rate that we are having even now, I mean, think about very small things that we do on a daily basis. You know, the use of electricity, plastic bags, you know, our water consumptions, so many things and practices that we do on an individual basis and on a daily basis, but not even taking into consequence these actions and what does it mean for the future generations. So part of the course that I'm offering at AUC is emphasizing the role of education and emphasizing our current responsibility as we try as much as possible to not only integrate knowledge related to these aspects, but also values and skills as well. And therefore, one of the points that I also like to emphasize when we're stressing on sustainable development, it might come to us, especially that I had the title with Greening the Campus, it's not just about the environment. Yes, the environment is important, of course, but to have a holistic view, we also need to include another pillar which is related to the economical aspects, and a third pillar which is related to the social aspects. And one of the things that I'm trying to get my students to think about and question and critique all the time, how can we think of embedding and balancing between the environment, the economical pillar, and the social pillar too? There's so many examples of countries that emphasize one over the other. And the important point that I want to make here is that we need to have a balance between these three. And the literature gives us some examples that it's called the triple bottom line, or the balanced kind of approach, where we emphasize the importance of the environment, but without actually diminishing the importance of the social aspects, the cultural aspects, and the economical aspects as well. So how can we include all of these together in a learning situations, and we can get the learners actually to think about the balance between all three. So actually I can't mention sustainable development without a historical quick view of the various countries where they put in their own hands and responsibility that we're going to achieve a better future and a better current even situation for ourselves these days. And there's so many actions and pledges and initiatives that took place. If you go back to the history of sustainable development, it probably even started in the 60s and even earlier. So many conferences and so many actions to take place. But we ended up with one that is, I think, is very popular now, with the SDGs 2030. And the SDGs 2030 is actually an umbrella with many countries taking this kind of pledge to try to achieve the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals in the next few years. But then the question would always be, we're 2022 right now. We've got 8 years to accomplish and achieve what 197 countries signed off to achieve in 8 years. I know many would say, okay, we got hit by COVID, we had a very terrible pandemic, we're not able to achieve what we pledged to do. But at the same time, if you look at these 17 goals, they're very much realistic and they're very much intertwined in a way. So you think about, for example, Sustainable Development Goal number 4 looks at quality education. If you think about quality education, that's a main aspect as scholars and professors of universities need to think about that. Combating, climate change. Okay, we've got so many talks about that. The COP27 that happened in Egypt last month. And of course, it was hosted there with all the different countries having all the talks and moving from pledges to actions. These are all, interesting talks, but what we can do in our fields, with our learners, with students, as our own responsibility too. So this kind of figure shows responsibility from 4 main actors. I'm emphasizing on academia. So we've got the public sector, business sector, civil society, and academia. I'm emphasizing on academia. And in academia, again, raising the same question, what should we do next? Social responsibility comes into the kind of the recipe. And when you think about social responsibility, there are many types of social responsibility. One of them that I often knew about and had this kind of acronym with the CSR. So some banks, some companies have their CSRs, which is the corporate social responsibility. And that's a nice way to provide for kind of a reduction of taxations that they have. But at the same time, it's kind of a win-win situation. So even in my own program, I have some companies and some businessmen who would come and say, we're going to fund professional development of 30 teachers as part of their company's CSR. It's a win-win situation. Teachers would need some professional development. They need the advancements in terms of their education. They need, if you invest in teachers, you invest in the next generations. And this is why I see that's a very much of a win-win situation. So this is the CSR. At the same time, as universities, there's the USR. And this is the university social responsibility that I'm trying to push towards. And you think about social responsibility for university, it's a holistic view. So some parts of the USR is related to the programs that the universities are putting forth for their students to come and enroll in. It might also include the everyday operations. So, I mean, going paperless in meetings or in the infrastructure of buildings or even waste management or even the food vendors on a specific campus. This is all related to actually the university social responsibility. So what if we have a top-down kind of approach? And then we're supposed to follow this top-down approach. Sometimes if you're convinced there's a buy-in, you would follow that. But in other situations, you actually need not just a top-down approach, but what is a bottom-up approach. So this is some kind of examples of what AUC does as my home institution, and the pledge that it tried to embed in its own operations. So having AUC as the first, or ranked the first actually in Egypt and in Africa, related to the Green Metric World University ranking. And this is why the three main aspects that come into place. It's very conscious in terms of its carbon footprint. It has an annual publication of how well it's doing, and is of course trying to reduce as much as possible its carbon footprint. It has a sustainability report, and in addition to that, it has a green guide report. So encouraging carpooling. It seems a very simple action, but the consequences on Earth, on planet Earth, on humanity, and on what we are trying to strive for our next generations. Even the kind of the water management, the heating, or the cooling system, these are some of the actions that AUC is very much aware of, and is actually priding itself by being conscious on that. Aligning what it does with the SDGs. So there's a report coming up on an annual basis. And if you're familiar with the Times Higher Education, I've just returned from a conference that was in Kuwait a couple of days ago. And it's actually launched the Arab rankings of universities, and they're including within it the Sustainable Development Goals and how well universities are aligned or not aligned with these. And then another aspect which comes with the AUC Green Guide report. So it looks at its campus, its operation, its waste management, its energy consumption, and so many other things which are not just environmental, but even its outreach and its awareness. So this kind of showcases an example of how a university sees social responsibility. The individual responsibility is very much kind of, I'd like to see it in this young lady, Swedish 19-year-old, when she took kind of the effort and the action to get the governments to think about their responsibility to climate change and how much they need to make changes at the policy level, but also the actions as well. And one of the things that Greta has done, and actually asked even other kind of youth to do, is have some strikes which they call the Friday for Future. It's just putting them into the driver's seat to provide for a voice of what they think as youth governments need to be doing, and their concerns about their future too. So when I'm thinking about my individual responsibility as a faculty member, as a citizen, but also where I have an opportunity to provide my own students and learners, this is what I'm doing. I'm giving them an opportunity to embed learning in a different situation, learning that is integrated, interdisciplinary, where it brings in problems from its locality inside our discussions, inside our classes, to bring in discussions inside our classes outside to the community, where we can see a win-win situation and a link between our community, our society, and our educational systems. There's so many global education reforms happening in different countries. In the States, we heard of the buzzword of STEM education in 2001. Some countries, similarly to Egypt, what we've done at AUC, we've pushed the boundaries a little bit further. Of course, the science is very much important, but we took on board the liberal arts, the humanities, the social sciences, and we expanded from STEM to STEAM. Other countries have actually gone one step beyond that and added the R. So some countries have used STREAM, and the R that represents different disciplines. Some of them might be robotics, reading, religion, whatever it is. The whole idea that we want our educational systems to emphasize the interdisciplinarity, to make it meaningful, and to make sure that the learning, when it's structured in a way where the science of learning, the neuroscience of learning is taken into consideration. And this is why when I'm looking at greening our campus, I'm actually looking at what I've offered my students. This is just a quick image of the AUC, and with the students, as I mentioned, at different levels in their studies, my aim at the individual responsibility level is to provide the students with an opportunity to voice and lead and look into the changes they need to make along with their communities while they're producing some content material that embeds the STEAM. And I've used STEAM Power 2 because I've got 2 E's in my acronym. I have the E, which is the engineering, the typical E that everyone is known about, but also the education sustainable development. With this interdisciplinarity, I've included the ESD, education sustainable development, the arts in its liberal arts, its fine arts, humanities, social studies, but also the STEM, which is in the sciences as a whole. And within that, I've actually made my students come to a journey throughout the course where it ends with them taking action. And why is action important? Because people are pledging and they're looking into finding places and voices for action. So within these kind of next slides, I'll just show you some of the main things that I've taken actually and presented even in COP27 with the climate change emphasis, but as again highlighting an importance, which is not just about the environment, it's the social aspects and the economical aspects and the culture too. So the next couple of slides are just quick ones related to some of the titles of my students have been working in bringing in the STEAM Power 2 with education sustainable development. Action. So at the end of the day, what we need is action. So this is what some of my students have been doing. These are some of the projects. I'll run them very quickly. So looking at change makers and leaders as they look into diversity, look into consumption, look even into the relationship between humanity and the environment. Another project that they worked on is destructive growth, urbanization in Egypt. So looking at health, poverty, transportation even, and looking and designing lesson plans that can bring in the different disciplines together in an interdisciplinarity way. Sustainable housing and a sustainable community, again, developing some material, some lesson plans to a target audience of their choices, and adding further linkages with sustainable development goals. So with that, the end of this can actually come to a conclusion of reaching to a holistic approach of how green our campus is. And with this, I'm actually ending this talk with some ideas and some food for thought, asking you as well to think and reflect of your own actions at the individual social responsibility level of what you can do to help us maintain and sustain our current, our present, and also our future. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you, Dr. El-Deghaidi, for this very interesting talk. I didn't know about all this work. It's really wonderful, really, really wonderful. I'll be speaking to you afterwards for my own university. I'm very delighted now to give the floor over to Dr. Giacomo Petrarca from the University San Raffaele of Milano. Giacomo, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So, I would like to express my deep gratitude to the organizing committee of the Riyadh Philosophy Conference and to Professor Joseph Cohen for the invitation and the privilege of speaking in such a prestigious and acknowledged context. So, the title of my speech is a quotation. Come, my friends, it is not too late to seek a newer world. Subtitle, Deconstructing the Notion of Exploration to Reinvent It. So, I began by shortly formulating my main thesis. All Western philosophy is a great attempt in exploration. The myth of the cave that Plato introduces in his great dialogue, The Republic, or one of the masterpieces of modern philosophy, such as Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy, or Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, or Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirits or Mind, it depends on taste, are impressive dramatization of a path of exploration. At the heart of these examples, there is the realization that the act of thinking is, as such, an act of exploration. Therefore, it produces a device of power, of appropriation over the thing known. In fact, knowledge is essentially featured by potency. I will try to focus on this during my speech. Just as exploring the world, knowing means to build up a map of this knowledge. What I'm trying to say is, thinking means map making. We can find a sort of elective affinity between the act of the philosopher and the explorer's one. The analogy is constructed between two meanings of the philosophical practice. On one hand, philosophy considered as love for knowledge, philosophia, and on the other hand, philosophy conceived as an attempt of orientation within an unfamiliar world, constructing a map of that knowledge that step by step is acquired. This map will be made up of steps, delays, gains, and also numerous defeats. For the very beginning, philosophers' need that immediately turns into a claim represents the necessity to move certain, and for that safe, steps in the inextricable multiplicity of things that philosopher meets every time as enigmas. places not yet visited, roads not yet traveled, names never conjured up, whose meaning still remains unknown. Thus, the philosopher elaborates his practice for orienting himself in this boundless, unknown space that we will call world, or more properly, his rational construction of the world. A world conducted and reduced to the habitable form of a map by the action of the philosopher-explorer. But not just any map at all, a rational map. I believe that we should read the word rational of any mythical or in some way secret valence that modernity has given it. Rational means nothing more than now we have a mapping of this world that was previously unknown. It means that this map has been done by following a specific criteria, a precise method of which the philosopher is perfectly aware. Moreover, he possesses the instrument, rationality, by which he had built his method. It is a skill that can be repeated, replicated at any time. It is universal. Everyone can use a map once one learns the rules of the game. This is an essential element about orientation. Philosophy thus becomes a kind of great rational cartography. In this way, there will be no more pits in which to stumble, as the pre-Socratic philosopher Tales of Miletus, because now those obstacles in the world will be known, marked, mapped up in a such way that they lose their nature as obstacles. And unknown obstacles is basically an obstacle we can avoid. Having briefly stated my thesis, I would like to return to the title of my speech. I confess that I feel in debt with you for some clarifications, in particular about the quotation contained in it. Come, my friends, it is not too late to seek a newer world. Starting with a quotation is probably not a good practice, especially when you do not agree with the quote itself. Self-defending myself, I will say that in philosophy, one has to start somewhere and with something, but I know this is not a good argument. However, I'm doubtful about the actuality of our quotation. It is not too late to seek a newer world. I guess that this exhortation no longer tells us as it did when it was written, or rather, it can no longer tell us, or perhaps it should no longer tell us, in the same way and with the same intensity through which it was conceived. I will try to show some of the reasons for this inadequacy. For the time being, I would like to rephrase the quotation in an interrogative and doubtful form. Is it really not too late to seek a newer world? I say that it is a quote. Therefore, I would like to describe a little bit the context in which it was written. It is a verse from the wonderful poem Ulysses, written by Victorian poet Lord Alfred Tennyson in October 1833. As Homer and Dante did before him, Tennyson has given voice to Ulysses again. However, we are dealing with a very different Ulysses from that of his predecessors. This one is no longer the great epic hero, the great king, the brave traveler, the intrepid lover, the man of manifold wits, who had changed the fortunes of Trojan War through the deception of the famous hordes. All of this belongs to his past. He is now a weary man, having reached the end of his days, and in this condition that we might say existential, he nostalgically thinks back to the past exploits and the fullness of his life. I quote, "All times I have enjoyed greatly, have suffered greatly. Everything has been seen and known by this modern Ulysses. But the glorious past is long gone. The time in which he lives is far from the great deeds that made him a famous name. Now, we can imagine the days of this veteran of history are accompanied by the tremor of a fireplace and the smoke of his pipe. However, homesickness is not the last word for this Victorian Ulysses. Regretting the past time is not the last act for this great epopee. The comparison with the time in which this poem was written is inescapable. At that time, Victorian kingdom was struggling with the exploration of sub-Saharan Africa that would lead to discovery of the sources of the Nile River in October 1860. So, homesickness spills over into new vitality, into a new glamour of challenge, the promise of a new ultimate adventure becomes what uniquely gives meaning to the existence of this Ulysses. The plan is clear: to hold himself and his fellow, I quote, to sail beyond the sunset. Tennyson's poem closes with these words, and though, in poetic English, even though we are not now that stretch which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. So, I have just made this narrative digression in order to indicate what is at stake, that is, to demonstrate our distance from Tennyson's words. Now, I would like to propose to you an exercise of deconstruction. I would like to start by asking the simplest and, at the same time, the most difficult question. What is an exploration? What does it mean to explore? I would just like to point out that one of the earliest uses of the noun exploration, or exploration in French derived from Latin exploratio, is attested in the late 16th century. We are often not really aware about the use and the history that words carry with them. So, since philosophical activities try every time questioning this common and unaware meaning, I had fun looking for the noun exploration into Cambridge Dictionary, and I found two different definitions. First one is the act of searching for something. The second one, more interesting, is the act of traveling to a place or searching a place in order to learn about it. I was very surprised and even disturbed by the optimistic prudence and the politeness of this second definition. that argues exploration would be aimed to learn about the thing or the place explored. I'm not sure that European explorers of the so-called New World at the beginning of the modern age were moved by this spirit of pure and unfettered curiosity, to the point of exploring a land in order to learn about it. I guess they were not so willing to listen to each other's reasons, but more concerned with the export of their own models and their own worldviews. In any case, the common element that emerges from the two definitions is first and foremost that exploration is a sort of search. To explore means looking for something. At the basis of this practice or action, we can find a common element. One should not start an exploration if he or she does not have something to seek for, or at least if he or she does not wish to discover something. Exploration is a research that has a precise object, already known, at least in desire, expectation, dream, or even legend, which means that one must have confidence or one must believe in the existence of what he or she seeks for. Of course, we don't know it yet, we have never seen it, or perhaps we never will see it. At the same time, the object of research must be present in some way in front of our eyes. Otherwise, we would not set out to look for it. When Columbus sets out in search of the Indies, he knows that Indies exist. What he seeks for, after all, is another way to get there. Then the unexpected happens, and the object of exploration changes its nature. But Columbus is not really aware at first. Now, this confidence in the existence of an object, a word, or something to discover is an essential part of our notion of exploration. So far, we have focused our attention on what one looks for. However, we have not yet said anything about the form of this exploration. What form does the act of exploration take? What kind of relationship exists between the explorer and the explored? What effect the exploration produces on the object explored? I believe this is an essential step in order to understand something more about our notion of exploration. A thin thread is stretched out in front of our eyes. We just follow its plot. In doing so, we see that exploration becomes discovery, and discovery becomes conquest. In this double passage, analogical and synonymical, the notion of exploration finally shows its deep meaning. Exploration becomes essentially an appropriative act, an act of domination over the explored object. Thus, not only an act of examination or investigation, but more precisely, an act of appropriation, of conquest, of colonization, an act in which the observer phagocytizes the observed object. We do not necessarily give to this appropriation a material dimension. It does not only concern things, places, resources of those lands. First of all, it has a semantic or linguistic connotation. The discoverer gives a name to the new land, calls this place according to his own linguistic categories. Basically, he invents for the first time what he's discovering. There is no America before Amerigo Vespucci's recognition of that land as America. Again, Tennyson, Ulysses, perfectly expresses this idea when he confers to be, I quote, a part of all that he has met. Now, in conclusion, I would like to underline that this act of appropriation is not an occasional stumble. It is not a short circuit that happened at some point in the history of the idea of exploration. On the contrary, it is its constitutive nature, concerning with that relationship between knowledge and potency that, at least since Aristotle, has characterized Western philosophical thought. Every single step of the classical and modern philosophical tradition is characterized by this strong relationship between knowledge and potency. So, my final question is, are we able to think outside this appropriative paradigm? Are we capable of abandoning it? That means, are we capable of abandoning the idea of seeking a new world and finally understanding, perhaps for the first time, this world we have vituperated, subjugated, reduced in our image? A contemporary philosopher, Vincenzo del Gaudio, recently wrote, Columbus sails into the unknown that seems known to him. It is known to him because of that map he carries with him that Paolo dal Pozzo Toscanelli drew. Every book is a map, one of those maps that can be disproved, like the maps of Columbus, precisely, the maps of Magellan. The point, because it is inconceivable to navigate without a maps, but it is equally inconceivable to follow only a preconstituted map. So, I guess it is not too late to seek not a newer world, but finally a world in its simplicity. I'm aware that at this point I have no arguments, only hope, and hope is really hard to handle. Many thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Giacomo Petrarca, for this deconstruction and deconstructive exercise. I want to open it to the floor, but I'm going to take advantage of my position as chair of this panel to pose a few questions. It may seem that we heard, and we did hear, three very different talks, three different, very different lectures, but I did find a common thread while I was listening to all of you. I mean, in many ways, the hope that you're finishing off in the face of this major aporia, this major paradox of exploring with a map or exploring without a map, is in a way attempted by, I mean, approached and sought in its realization by action, by the very concrete action that you are proposing in order to transform this, not only the space of the university, but through this space of the university, which is a space of paradox, of aporia, the greater world, and with Alejandra Fernandez, what was incredible is that what was completing this common thread, if I may, was that the task here is not for outer space, but for the Earth that does not move. Yeah? And perhaps this is the urgency of all three talks here is to phenomenologically expressed. I would say it is to step back and look within before stepping out and seeking to step beyond or into the beyond. I think that's a very responsible thing to say in this conference, and I thank you very much for deploying it. Are there any questions here that could be addressed? Yes, please.
Thank you. Okay, so my question is, we're talking about space exploration, and
Can you speak just a little bit louder?
yeah, is this
Thank
clear?
you. Great.
Okay, so now we're talking about space exploration, and we're talking about the future of humanity. My question is, and really it's more directed to Dr. Heba, as we're talking about STEM, STEAM, or STREAM, and these programs are about preparing the newer generations, the younger generations, for the methodology of thinking. Now, Dr. Heba, you're speaking about STEM, STREAM, STEAM in the universities. Now, my question is, should or what would be the ideal timing of introducing this methodology of thinking to the generations, younger generations, early education, and what impact would it have on these programs, space exploration programs? Thank you.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you so much for the question. If I'm looking into STEM and STEAM education, one of the points where I was actually invited to King Saul University 2019, I was actually at that point looking into STEAM education in the early childhood. And although it might seem that it's too early, but I would go on the other way around, that we need it as early as possible. We have examples in Egypt of STEM schools that are only starting at the high school level. Whereas if we think about a new innovative way of thinking and learning, it has to come at an early stage. The consequences of that, once you open the minds, the thoughts, the ideas at an early stage, you're definitely looking into something or an outcome that is very much innovative. And we need innovation because even the job market is looking for innovation. We're far beyond the traditional way we teach, the way we learn, the way we even work. And many of us, maybe not in this room specifically, but we are now listening or hearing more interdisciplinary fields coming together, new job markets. We've never heard of titles and jobs in different titles than we used to. And this is all the consequence of the future, if we're going to take that into consideration in a respectful and in a committed way, whether it's for this generation or the ones to come. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Yes, Gerardo de la Fuente.
Thank you. Well, I deeply appreciate all the presentations. It was very, very interesting, all the panel. I have two questions. The first for the Italian professor. It was very, very interesting, this idea of philosophy as exploration, all the history of philosophy as exploration. But I think that there's another meaning in philosophy that it's present all the history in philosophy. I think the meaning of take a walk, promenade. And I think that it's another sense of philosophy, that it's present in Diderot, in Nietzsche, in Benjamin. And that other sense is very, very important because nowadays the powers have appropriated the sense of navigate. We can go to the computer and we can navigate all of the social networks offer to us to navigate. So there's always a map and all the roads are described right now. So the power of philosophy maybe is to promenade, to take a walk go without a direction. But I think that maybe you can share that with me. But when you talk, you said that philosophy is a rational aim, a rational intention. What kind of rational should be that we can get this other sense to take a walk without aim? Maybe that's a subversive way to think today. And to the professor of Egypt, it was very, very interesting, but in your graphics, it was very, very quickly, the presentation, but I didn't see the word philosophy in your graphics. And I didn't see too the word politics. And it's not a responsibility of the university to make protests in the streets, not only the students, no. The authorities go to confront the political power, the economic power, to make a little change in this world. Thank you.
So,
yes.
thank you for your remark, or more, your question. I think it's a central question. I will try to say that. I think that Nietzsche is the start of the end of this paradigm between knowledge and potency, which is the new that Nietzsche announces, the separation between knowledge and potency. Potency could improve herself without no reference to the knowledge. So I think it's the opening of another age, the age in which we are living. So you say, take a walk. Yeah, Socrates but in Socrates there isn't an aim to build a structure of knowledge. Knowledge is something that sometimes happens, sometimes not. So I think that classic and modern philosophy built a very strong paradigm of this rationality. And rationality has a constructive soul, we can say. I think, but it's very complicated, and we can debate after. But thank you very much.
Dr. Hill, yes.
In terms of what I presented, what am I emphasizing on is actually getting learners to question and think and take responsibility. And within their thinking, they're expanding beyond just a specific area or discipline, and to include various other disciplines, so learning becomes more meaningful and more kind of related. Because at some point, even if I look at myself, I mean, through my ages of learning, so much has been learned that is not usable. And it's just, for memorization or for knowledge, pure knowledge. I mean, knowledge is good, of course. But the thing is, what I'm trying to emphasize is, what can we do with this knowledge? What is the next step? And to get the learners take the lead, to be the change makers, to emphasize and push, to question and to critique. Maybe protesting is a nice way to do it. But honestly speaking, maybe not a good way, and you're in a country where, you've got to get some, bad consequence of that. So we have to be wary about the context as well. So pushing the boundaries is important, but what I'm pushing two things. Number one, responsibility. So we're all responsible, we're all in the same boat. And the second thing is this cohesiveness as a community, but also as disciplines come together in a meaningful way. Thank you.
Sir.
Hi, everybody. Thank the organizers, the speakers. My question for Dr. Giacomo, if I'm not mistaken, I really like what you just talked about that bridge between naming and how naming or exploring turned into appropriation. And you also mentioned something about colonization and all that. Now, that for me, and you also give us that long history of philosophy justifying all this. Now, on one hand, I don't know how anthropology came to my mind, this whole discipline of research, which was a tool of colonization, for instance. All these anthropologists were sent to colonies in order to understand how these people work, to understand their culture. So when we go there, we understand how to deal with them. So the whole thing of understanding, exploration, whatever, that was understood in terms of benefit, in terms of economical benefit or whatever, or political authority extending there into these places. Now that, on one hand, I want to see what you think about this. My second point is probably philosophical. And I understand that you, by the end of your lecture, you suggested that we should get rid of these categories through which we understand the explored. But I'm actually doubting how can we do that. Isn't thinking always contextual, always situated? Like when I try to understand something over there, I always understand it from my position, according to my culture. And there's like lots of schools actually in philosophy and linguistics and like talking about this. And now, is it possible at all to get rid of this? I know that some philosophers actually entertain the idea of thinking from no grounds, whatever. Heidegger talked about something to that effect. But I don't know if that's possible at all. Like, give me one example. Thank you.
Thank
Wow.
you, Dr.
It's
Dr.
a topic
Petrarca.
for next
The
year.
topic for the next conference.
No, I try to say something about it in my Italian English. I think that yes, there is a problem, and your reference to anthropology, I think it's very pointed, because today there is a reform in anthropological field, the ontological to say in English, ontological reform, we can say. And this is a strong critics against Lévi-Strauss, at least, at first. Because, the anthropological approach of Lévi-Strauss was too Eurocentric. This is the problem. And the problem is that we have, we can say, a sunglasses that we can remove, you say. Our culture, our language, is a pre-comprehension of our research. Yeah, it's true. But I think that we can reduce our aim, we can reduce our volume, our idea that our position is the position, our view is the view. I think that deconstruction, sometimes people say deconstruction is only something of negative. Deconstruction doesn't produce nothing, no? Because there isn't a constructive moment in deconstruction. But I think that deconstruction says to us, stop, reduce your field, reduce your potency in order to understand the other. So I think it's a...
It's one form of critique.
Yeah, and yeah, in a certain sense, I know. It's a nihilistic approach, but I'm European. I can ask, I think, a good question, but I'm not sure that I have answer, no? You know. This is a problem. No, very much. Thank you very much for your question.
Any other questions? Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much for the different perspectives that you've enriched us with in the
You have
past
to
hour.
speak a
or
little
so.
bit louder,
Sure.
Yeah,
sorry.
please.
Okay. From what I've heard from you here and what we've heard earlier, and as we're discussing life on another planet, and we're still, of course, we still have questions that have not been answered here on planet Earth and the everyday life and the philosophical questions, etc. What came to mind, what I am inspired to ask is, if we were to create a hero, a contemporary hero, how would that hero look like? I know it's a broad question, and that hero would definitely, or we assume that person would be an adult that had a different childhood, and throughout growing up, they might have, I don't know, lived so many lives and changed, like, in this time of internet and etc. But would, for example, the story take place inwardly, juxtaposed outwardly? What would the wins of that hero look like? And yeah, how would we create that modern hero?
Wow.
Thank you.
That's a great, great question. I love that question. It's an incredible question.
Joseph, do you remember, because I don't know in English, the quotation of Brecht
Yes.
in about the necessity, the wrong necessity to have a hero?
Yes, yes, yes.
I think that there is a strong, to be honest, a strong proximity between our panel and the opening speech, because I think there is no, Joseph said, there is not another Earth. And the opening speech showed that there isn't another Earth, because we are trying to replicate our Earth on Mars.
Yeah.
So the problem is there isn't another possibility. So which kind of hero? I think that hero produced the notion of hero in the history produced many catastrophic consequences. Maybe we can try to construct an anti-hero, but because this is the point, capable to do something, because literature produced many anti-heroes, but not capable to do nothing. So.
And Dr. Heda, you had Greta on your time person of the year. So who would what would your hero look like then? Hero with quotation marks.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think it's going to be a person. I think it has to be something holistic. So a community that can be I think minimizing it to a one individual might be a bit of a limitation. I would see even humanity as a hero. I mean, given what we are facing and what we need to face and what we need to be prepared to face, this could be our thoughts, our ideas, our collective feelings and values. This is how I see being the heroism or the hero, rather than reducing it to a specific person or criteria or description. I think that'll be very hard to do.
Professor Fernandez?
I think about philosophy. The philosophy is a form of life, combative of dogmatism, which dangerous.
The microphone. So,
Dangerous.
can you?
Sorry. The philosophy is a form of life, combative, anti-dogmatic, and this is the problem. Philosophy destroying the history and alive with a history. Suppose culture, but destroy culture. Propose ground fundamentation, and suppose not fundamentation is very critical. Critical is the constructive form of thinking and the constructive form of writing. And philosophy propose universal earth, world, universal world, but is not contemplative of the difference, as the difference is a problem for a critical, expositive form philosophy. The philosophy is the philosophy not have not one response. It's a sum. All the response, his history is history. The many response, paradoxically response. This is the problem. Husserl, for example, say the earth don't move, but I say the earth is move, rotate in his orbit, but the earth is not move in this moment, and the earth don't move in each culture and his history of the culture, and in this reflection on the earth, on suppose the earth as soil of the thinking of humanity. Humanity don't exist, but I say humanity. I propose humanity. Humanity is questioned for philosophy. Nietzsche say, don't exist humanity, but exist Übermenschen, Superman, Überman, but no in this moment, no in this present. This is the nihilism. Philosophy is fundamentation and nihilism. Paradoxically, is equality in fundamentation and critique. This is a problem.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to the panel. Perhaps we can close with a quotation, not from Brecht, but from Heidegger. Heidegger says somewhere in a very interesting article entitled "The Essence of Technology." Heidegger says somewhere that the question, yeah, the question is the piety of thinking. So perhaps that's a good way to end this panel, which questions both the need to act for humanity and perhaps the need to think beyond humanity in humanity. So thank you very much.
Humanity in
Thank you very much.
humanity. Okay. As technology is humanity.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.